everybody, and welcome to the Cabaret Secrets podcast. My name's Gary Williams, and today, well, I'm going to call this edition All the Things You Wanted to Ask a Cruise Director But Never Dared. And I've got with me now, one of my favourite cruise directors, entertainment directors, as they're sometimes called now, Keith Maynard. Keith, welcome to Cabaret Secrets.
Hello, thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
So you're an entertainment director now. What were you doing before this, and how does somebody end up being an entertainment director?
Okay, oh dear, that's quite an interesting one. I've been an entertainment director now about 6 years. I first came away to sea in 2000, so that's about 12 years. Time, yeah. But I've not done it constantly since then. I trained as an actor originally, did quite a few years touring theatre in the UK, and then I was sitting in the green room one day up in Yorkshire, and very cold, bitter, typical Yorkshire winter's day. Freezing.
Sounds like a typical summer's day in Yorkshire as well.
Yeah, pretty much. And a gentleman called Dan Defoe, I always remember it, came in. He was a bit of a character, was known amongst the theatre company for being a bit of a drama queen. He kind of stalked in with his kind of long flowing locks, and he had this kind of tan. And we got chatting, and he'd been comparing for the last 6 months out in a hotel in Spain. He was talking about the job, and it kind of appealed to me that working abroad and learning a new skill, and having more time to kind of relax in the sunny weather rather than freeze in the cold weather. So I went down to London. I applied to the company, went down to London, got an audition, and then eventually they asked me to go on to ships rather than hotels. So it was never intended. I never intended to go away to sea. I just kind of took an opportunity and then was given the chance and joined a ship in Southampton called the Sundream in March of 2000. So not intentional, but then as soon as I went away at sea, I kind of fell in love with it, and it's kind of pulled me back ever since.
So what is the role of a cruise director and entertainment director? What are your responsibilities? Because you're very important, aren't you?
In my own mind, yeah. I mean, it's you're in charge of the entertainment department, so your roles, you're really the MC, the compere of the ship, of the particularly of the show lounge on board. You're the face of that, of the ship, and that kind of really that first point of contact for guests. It really depends company to company and ship to ship how much that involves. The teams tend to be quite big, so I've got 110 people in my department, and that includes 33 musicians, kind of 18 or so in the technical department. And then you've got your kids zone, you've got your ent staff, shall we say, your production cast.
So there's a lot of sort of people management involved, as well as, I mean, what everybody sees you doing is standing on stage with a microphone for 3 or 4 minutes at the beginning and end of each show, but there's a lot more going on in the background than that.
Absolutely, yeah. The bigger the company, the more administration there is with the job, and the more you have to also put hours in the office. So there is a lot of that as well. So I would do every day at least I'd say probably 5 or 6 hours in the office doing administration stuff, managing, and kind of dealing with issues as they arise.
And as far as guest entertainers I'm concerned, you're my boss. You're my sort of immediate boss, or you're not the immediate. I mean, there's a production manager, and how does it work? What's the hierarchy?
Well, for you on the production side, yeah, you have a production manager who looks after the theatrical lounges around the ship, and then she or he will have a staff of technicians. And they're also directly responsible for your show team and for the guest entertainers, whether that's yourself headline as a headline act, or whether that's a classical artist. And then and then of course she reports to me. So I suppose in a way, yes, you're whilst you're travelling with us, you're part of that department, you're part of that team.
Because often I'll see entertainment directors on ships. I mean, I'll see them. The only time I see them is at the beginning, at the end of shows. Because they're busy. You've got a lot to do, and you haven't got really the time to hang out much. And it's not the day-to-day things and setting up rehearsals and organising the shows. That's what the production manager's there for, right? Yeah,
I mean, it really will depend on the entertainment director as to how much you'll see them, and it will depend on the demands on their time. Some like to be out and about a little bit more. I wish I could be out more. I'd love to have a secretary so I could be out a lot more. But certainly when you come on, if it's a smaller ship, then you'll have maybe a lot more direct contact with the ships I used to work for. I spent 6 years with Thompson, and and I had a great time with them. And they're smaller ships, they're 33,000 tons or something, which is
as opposed to Queen Mary 2, which is
150,000 tons. Yeah.
That's a lot bigger, yeah.
Yeah, they're much bigger. So you're out more. There's not as much administration to do. You can be. I used to be in the shows, so you'll go on some companies where you may well have an entertainment director that takes far more of an active role in that, and is more of a. For Thompson, for instance, they don't really have production managers. You're directly responsible for that cast and for those shows as well, and you may well lead the shows and be in the shows.
So I'm here because, initially, when I start working on a particular ship, it's because my agent's got a relationship with the company, with the office, with the booker there, and he'll sell me to use a showreel or whatever, sell me to the booker in the office. I get on the ship. Do you just take it for granted that the actor is going to be good and do their job? How much of an active role do you take in, quality control of the artists that come by? Do you watch the shows? Does it really matter? Do you just go on the passenger comment cards at the end, or have you got your own reports that you put in? How does that work?
Well, all of that. All of what you said, really. Fundamentally, I'm not there during the audition process in most cases, though I will recommend certain artists that I've worked with before, and I'm always asked if I want certain people on certain voyages.
So you do have quite an active role in hiring then, because some people might just think, as long as the office, they get booked by the office and they've just got to impress the people in the office. But once on the ship, you've got quite a lot of sway in whether they're going to come back or not, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. I have to write my voyage report, and that voyage report will have my report on each act, and that would include what they score via the customer service questionnaire, which will be a percentage out of 100, but it will also include my own comments. I always watch the first show of any act,
even if you've seen them before, or
even if I've seen them before, I'll always stay backstage. I'll stay backstage and I'll stand in the wings and I'll watch. I prefer to do that. I prefer to be backstage most of the time anyway, because you never know what's going to happen. I don't want to be too far from the theatre just in case, So I always do that. It's very rare that I'm ever not there for the whole of the first show, and mostly in the second show I'll be there for most of it. I might just pop out for 10 minutes, but I'll be there or thereabouts. I listen to the feedback of the guests themselves, and I can tell as soon as I walk out there after taking an act off whether they've enjoyed it or not. And then, because I like to be out and about anyway, you get feedback about that act as you go along. You'll also get the score, that's there.
This is the guests filling out their, what do you call it, the questionnaires, the satisfaction questionnaires at the end, where they rate everything, or all of the acts, the food, the service, everything, right?
Absolutely, yes, yeah, and we'd always be looking.
We're all being judged all the time. It's terrifying.
It's true, yeah, and standards are very high. We'd want any artist really to be always getting kind of, in the 80s, preferably mid to high 80s. That's what we'd be wanting. So we always look for that.
How much notice, I've got to ask this question, how much notice do the people in the office actually take of the reports and I know, they're always saying, oh, we do value your feedback, please give it, but does anybody read these things? Because I always imagine there's so many ships out there, there's so much information being, so many emails being, does anybody actually read this stuff and act on it? And if you see an act and say, wow, this guy was fantastic, or this woman was dreadful, please use or please don't use, does anybody read it? Do you send these things off and then 6 months later think, why is this person back?
Absolutely, they do read it. They're very good with Cunard. I can't say for other companies. Certainly, they treat the entertainment director role with the Cunard entertainment directors with respect as the face of the eyes of the company on the ship. For instance, only 2 days ago I was asked to comment on an act I'd had on the World Voyage, and it was back in early February. And I couldn't remember what I'd said because it was a long time ago, and so they had to send me the report, and then they asked me why I'd said what I'd said and whether I felt that because they were thinking
because it was a little bit critical, presumably, and is that why? So presumably then the agent's trying to book the act again, and the office is saying, well, he didn't do very well before, we've had some comments, and the agent is trying to defend the act and saying, no, he's never had a bad comment before. Yeah. And so that's quite encouraging actually for any act, isn't it? There's time and consideration being spent before an act is just dismissed, right? Just think, we're not going to use that person again.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, there's been occasions where I've had to be very direct about an act and say that's not, they're not suitable and we don't want them back, and that happens. And there's no questions asked because they'll understand the seriousness of it. This was more the acting person had done well, but my recommendation wasn't necessarily that they're used on a voyage-to-voyage basis purely because of the style of act. So then the question was asked because the booker, one of the bookers in the office, knows this act from another company where they've seen them and they've thought they've done very well, and so I've kind of said, well, okay, fair enough. That was my impression from when that person was on board, but it's worth giving them another try.
It's encouraging for me to hear that, and I think for artists to hear that, because sometimes we do worry that you're up there, you might have a bad week, you might have a bad show, or it might be a really bad audience. Sometimes you put on and it's an overnight somewhere and the theatre's or everyone's tired because they've been travelling to Egypt that day, and you've got this graveyard shift and your show doesn't go very well and you think, oh my God, are they going to hire me again? But it's not quite as hard as that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think if in those circumstances you've mentioned, if someone wants to put you on put an act on when it was a long tour day or it was a late sale, then obviously you're asking for trouble. I mean, you bear all those things in mind, and I think you bear in mind the score that they receive alongside the general trend that you read through everything, and you also bear it in mind with what you know of them beforehand. And I always can't help but bear in mind with the human element of how that person is. I will far more important to me. Much more important to have an act that's solid, but that is a very nice person and who is happy to be seen around the guests and generally be a nice person, than it is to have someone who loves themselves but also is a great act. Well, if someone becomes that high maintenance, I'd prefer not to have them and have someone else, because
I think there's a lot of great acts out there, right? So you can afford to be quite choosy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone's great on stage, but they're difficult off stage. You can think, what, I'm too busy for this.
Well, absolutely, yeah, because the thing is that you can't run away from your audience when you're on a ship, particularly Queen Mary 2 when it's transatlantic. You've got 7 days with these people. The acts will always say it's very difficult, if they worry because if they don't feel they've gone well the next day, they've got to have breakfast with these people. It's not the same. You can't get in your car and drive away from the club. It'll be paid out at the end of the night. You're on board. So to be a nice person and to be willing to be there, to be available, is important. Not saying that I expect acts to go out and socialise, because I don't 24/7, but I just much prefer people who can be approached, and have that kind of openness about them, like yourself, like John Evans is on at the moment, people who have that ability to be nice people when they're out and about, rather than someone who is closed off and really doesn't want to know. And I've worked with people like that, people, they're not people.
So some acts, I think, see the guests or see the audience members as sort of the enemy almost, don't they? They sort of want to run away from them, or they lock themselves in their cabin for most of the voyage, which is something that I don't understand. So that's interesting, that if a new act who's starting on ships for the first time wants to do well and wants to make the right impression, part of what they should be doing is being out and about and hands-on and walking around the ship and just being eager and happy and comfortable, chatting to guests. And
absolutely, yeah. Another nice thing I've seen certain acts do, which I really like, and again, some do it, some don't, and it's a nice thing to do, particularly if you're new and you want to make a good impression, is to debrief, is to go out and meet the guests after the show, if you feel happy to do that, and that's nice, because again, it's like,
so let's get off stage, run around, go to the doors, and as people are coming out, shake their hands, thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming, yeah, just a simple thank you for coming. I mean, I'm not saying that that's going to guarantee anything. Some people would feel comfortable, and some people may not feel comfortable with that. But that's just something I know a couple of acts that do that, and it works very well for them, and I'm very impressed if I see it, because I think that's great. But it's not needed, but it is a nice thing if people want to make a good impression.
What else impresses you with acts when things that they do that are new acts? They think, oh, okay, good. That's something I should try and do. I mean, it's not really just to make a good impression on you. If we're making a good impression on you, that's because it's making a good impression on the whole voyage and it reflects on the whole team, right? So whichever company that we're working for, this is what you're talking about. Your little sort of wish list from acts is something that everybody should know, and just ways to try and the ways that they should be conducting themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think everyone has to be aware of that their act maybe needs to adjust depending on the audience. It depends on the clientele. We have quite an international clientele, not as international as some, but we do get, like this voyage, is 1,200 Brits, nearly 800 Americans, and then you've got maybe 70 Germans and 90 Canadians and 30 Australians. It goes on and goes on, some Japanese. But sometimes we can have a much bigger swing towards Germans, or a much bigger swing towards mainly Americans, or we might have 200 or 300 Chinese or Japanese on, and all these things have to be taken into consideration. Sometimes the clientele themselves, the demographic is a lot older, and you have to be gentler and softer the way you approach. So patter itself can be quite important in between actually thinking about what's going to link your songs and the reasons as to why. One of the nice things I find is if you have a personal story. There's a great artist who's just recently started called Philip Brown, and he tells a story about how he went from being a bus driver to get into the West End, and he spaces it.
He's got the number 19, huh?
Exactly. And he's got that lovely, he's got a lovely kind of story, which is quite, Matt Monroe-esque, I suppose, in that sense. But he works it, and it's very personal, and it warms people to him. So there's a sincerity, and I think that's probably the key, actually, that word there, sincerity, hitting the nail on the head. Whatever you do, you have to be sincere. It's really, really important that the guests see you as a sincere, genuine person. Insincerity is the first thing that will put a barrier up, and that will make them take a step back from you, because they come to that theatre on a ship wanting you to be good, because they're on board. There's an atmosphere already building. They're a ready-made audience for you. So in a sense, there'll be a positive energy before you go on, and they want you to be good. And so being yourself and being sincere and being open and being genuine in what you say to them is really, really important. So I would say genuine and sincere patter is important. Do
you think that kind of sincerity is something that can be learned, or do you think just people either have it or they don't?
That's a good question. I think anything can be learned. I think once you learn to open up and relax, I think anything can be applied. I think it's like anything. The more you practice something, the more you allow yourself to be open to something, the more that will naturally develop. I think it's nice if you have. I mean, like, for instance, I know with your act, you put a lot of patter in, which is great, which makes people laugh. You've got your little moments there, which you come off, and it's really, really nice, and that creates the kind of peaks and troughs that a performance needs. So I think I don't know. For me, patter's important. That kind of because you do get acts sometimes that are very, very good, technically, vocally, or musically, but they can't talk on a mic. They can't link it, and that's.
Do you think it's enough to be, a great vocalist but not very good at the patter? Do you think, just being a great singer or a great instrumentalist is enough?
If you really are great, then I'm sure it probably is enough, but you need to still work on it and not relax to it. I would say, if you really want to.
I remember seeing Sarah Brightman once at an outdoor event, and one of these firework picnic things, and of course she sang beautifully, but she didn't say one word in between songs to the audience, and there was a complete feeling amongst the audience of indifference towards her. They sort of didn't really like her. They sort of, well, yeah, of course she's a great singer, but they didn't really. They felt she was a bit stuck up, and who knows, but the fact that she didn't really say anything, people just got that bad impression.
Absolutely, and that's the problem. If you don't say anything like that, or if you hide behind your talent to the point where you're not able to then present yourself, then people will make assumptions on who that person is. So you might never know. And if it happens to someone as talented as Sarah Brightman, and as famous as her, then it's gonna happen to. It could happen to anyone.
Because on the other hand, I've seen, and tell me what you think, but I've seen people who aren't very good vocalists, but are really good at their patter. They've got such a charming, sincere stage presence that people don't care that they can't really sing terribly well. They just love them.
Absolutely. No,
do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the converse. That's the other side of the coin. At the end of the day, you want to try and charm your audience, and part of that charm comes from being able to communicate with them and show them who you are, and that's where the sincerity and the genuine nature comes in, and that's where the personal touch comes in, and it's therefore, the stronger that is, the more they're going to focus on that rather than anything else. It's like a dancer, they always say, don't they, when you train to dance, make sure your smile's as big as possible, make sure your face is alive, because if it is, they won't be looking at your feet. And it's so true. They won't look past. They'll forgive you anything, and this is why it's good to be out and about as an act and get to know people. I mean, I've worked with one particular act, of course, who will remain nameless, who, as an act I've never really rated them as an act. I really haven't. But on board the ship, they will know every single person on that ship by the end of the voyage. They will have gone round, and they'll always score well. And because
people like them.
Because people like them, and by the time their show comes up, that person's worked so hard to make sure that they're known and be likeable just by being themselves, that they're all behind them. And therefore, even though the act is a little bit kind of, it's kind of, they respond to it, and from my point of view, that's fine, and my reports would always reflect that. They'd always say, okay, no fireworks, but they really love that person, because that person is a nice person and has gone round and chatted to everyone, and they're happy. And if the guests are happy, I'm happy, pretty much.
Before we perform, we're told to give you 45, 50 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it might be. How important is it from your point of view that we stick pretty much exactly to that time?
I tend to be quite relaxed within reason. If an act is going really well, and they go up to 55 minutes when we're asked for 45, I don't mind. If it goes over an hour, then I would start to get. I wouldn't be happy, but that's me, and it's always better to check with the particular entertainment director. And if they start going on about time and saying strict 45, give them a strict 45, because I know a lot of entertainment directors that will ball people out over it and be very, because you have to push. The idea is that you're pushing people to different venues at different times, and particularly if you're doing 2 seatings, and every time in an evening you've got 2 seatings.
In the restaurant? In
the restaurant, yeah, and the shows that you show in the theatre will reflect those restaurant sittings, and you will want then to push those people out into another venue in order to make space for the next people to come in. The theatre's got to be cleared. It could be that you've got big events on the other side of the ship in the ballroom that won't start until those people start coming through. So you're delaying everything else. You're having a knock-on effect. So within reason, I'm always flexible to 10 minutes or so, and I'm particularly if someone's doing really well, I want to see the guests happy. I want to see them having a good time. But check with the individual entertainment director or cruise director, because some of them are very, very strict about it.
So what final words of advice would you give to someone that's not worked on a ship before, is going to walk onto the fabulous Queen Mary 2, wants to make a good impression, wants to do a good show? What are the sort of top tips? What should they know as far as an entertainment director is concerned? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Be yourself. Be open. Spend the first couple of days looking around you, seeing who your audience are, and then see if you need to adapt your act appropriately. And if you're concerned at all, ask the entertainment director for their advice. Don't be a recluse. Be visible. Listen to what these people are saying. So you might pick up things that you could use. It's funny when you hear things in the lift or overhear things at lunch. Which you can then work into your own performance. That may be themes that that work really well. And be punctual with your with your timings and whenever you arrive on board a ship, always check what's been mailed to you, because more or less when you walk into your stateroom, when you come on board, there'll always be letters telling you when your performances are. If you're required, for instance, like on here, to come on the TV show, you might get on and an hour later be expected to be on the TV show ready for the next morning, and the filming of that. So always check. It's best not to just it's best to open it up and read everything carefully. And apart from that, just enjoy it, because the more enjoyment and fun you have, and the more you get the guests can see that you're enjoying yourself and on stage enjoying yourself, the more they will do. Because obviously you're doing this and coming away and have got the chance to work on a ship because you're good at what you do. So be confident in that and enjoy it.
Sounds great advice. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you for listening to this Cabaret Secrets podcast. If you've got any comments or questions, please visit cabaretsecrets.com, where you'll also find details of the Cabaret Secrets book, an indispensable guide on how to create your own show, travel the world, and get paid to do what you love.